It's great to have our speaker here who's zoomed in from the UK, Dave Hodrien. And Dave's the chairman and lead investigator for the Birmingham UFO Group, one of the most active UK-based groups looking into the UFO subject there. And I got to know Dave because he's the deputy representative for ISA in the UK, which I think most of you now know, the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research. So, and Dave writes regularly for UFO Truth magazine, which is published by Gary Hesseltine. He's previously written for Outer Limits, Paranormal UFO Data magazine, and he's spoken at many conferences and appeared on TV and radio numerous times. Now, tonight, Dave, he's got a particular interest in contact, and he's investigated hundreds of cases from around the world. And there are many interesting aspects to contact which are observed repeatedly, as many of you know. And one of the aspects which is particularly intriguing is the screen memory phenomenon. And we heard a lot about this during the 1990s, where beings seemingly mask their own identity or the appearance of their craft and visually appear as something completely different to the individuals involved. So in this new talk, Dave's going to explore this particular phenomenon in depth, and he'll present real case examples where it's occurred, including actual witness drawings. And he's going to also explore the various possible explanations and delve into the science behind what's taking place. So this is going to be a very interesting presentation, I know. And Dave is a fountain of information. So take it away, Dave. Really looking forward to this.
Well, good evening, everybody. As Cheryl said, it's absolutely wonderful to be here to talk with your group. I speak with lots of different organisations, different paranormal and UFO groups around the world, and I've also spoken at many conferences. But essentially, I love speaking with people who've already got an interest in the subject, because there's a lot of background information on the contact subject. And sometimes when I speak about the subject, I'm talking to beginners, essentially people who don't know anything about the abduction phenomena. And I'm going to assume that most of you, if not all of you, know quite a bit about that already, and have been told that over the years by Cheryl and heard lots of talks on the subject. And many of you may well have heard of screen memories before, but however much you think you know about the subject, I'm sure there'll be some new information for you within this talk, as well as lots of examples of cases that I've actually directly dealt with over the years. It's a particularly fascinating aspect of the subject, and I'm going to go into a bit background of what it actually is. For me, the contact subject, it gives us a window into what's actually going on here with the UFO or UAP enigma, however you want to refer to them. Now, I'm going to come from the premise that these things are real and involve other beings. That's my particular viewpoint on the subject, as it is Cheryl's, and that's why I am a part of ISA. We joined ISA with that in mind, that we supported the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Now I say extraterrestrial, but of course there are other possibilities. So we say advanced intelligences. You may have other views as to exactly where these beings are from, maybe extra dimensional or coming back from the future to our time. But I think the important thing to realise is that there are other advanced intelligences with this. So I'm going to go into my lecture with that as a kind of pre-point. But with that said, let's begin. So first of all, as I said, there's going to be a general overview on the subject of screen memories. Then I'm going to go through the different types of screen memories that can occur in cases. There'll then be quite a few different case examples showing these different screen memory types from real cases that I've investigated. And then in the later part of the talk, I'll go over the possible explanations for what's happening here. There's be some conclusions at the end, and then a nice little additional bit which we'll get to. So yeah, screen memories, an overview. So what are screen memories? So the official meaning from the dictionary is this: it's a distorted memory, generally of a visual rather than verbal nature. So that's the official Oxford Dictionary for screen memory. And the term, this term was first coined by this chap, the famous Austrian neurologist Sigmund Freud, who many of you will have heard of. And right back in 1899, he released a paper entitled Screen Memories. So this is looking at screen memories from a very scientific viewpoint, not necessarily focused towards contact at this point. So this is a quote from that: "The falsified memory is the first that we become aware of. The essential elements of an experience are represented in memory by the inessential elements of the same experience." That's a direct quote from that paper, which of course is very, very detailed. You can probably find that online if you want to read the entire thing. So what he means by that statement, is that there is in general no guarantee of the data produced by a memory. Now think about that for a minute. Isn't that fascinating? It means that memories that you think you've had in the past, that you're remembering things that have happened to you, you may not be remembering them exactly as they took place. Quite scary, really. So screen memories are thought to be a blend of two different things: repression and transference. So repression is the unconscious exclusion of difficult or unacceptable memories, impulses, desires, or thoughts from our conscious memory. And transference is the transfer of feelings regarding something onto something else, from a thing onto a different thing. So yeah, screen memories, they've served as a source for artistic creation over the years, including the famous Lewis Carroll novel Alice in Wonderland, which this animated GIF is meant to represent here. Now, in that, if you remember in Alice in Wonderland, Alice saw lots of things that were from her normal life, but they were completely changed. For example, the caterpillar that she saw, which she was speaking to, it was all sort of greatly enhanced in size, and it was talking to her. She was having deep conversations with it. It was only after I put this animated GIF in that I realised the similarity with those mushroom houses down the bottom and flying saucers, of course, is completely unintentional. So how does the subject of screen memories, how does it relate to contact? Well, individuals who've experienced contact, sometimes when they recollect their memories, they recall visual aspects of the experience incorrectly. And we know this from the many, many cases on record and what we're expecting them to see in their experiences. And we can see that things aren't quite right with their recollections. And the appearance of the beings, the exterior of their craft, both at a distance and up close, or sometimes the interior of the craft, can be essentially masked, and they'll remember something completely different. Now, this doesn't always occur. I've dealt with lots of cases, lots of contact cases from all countries, including Australia, where it doesn't occur. Yeah, it only happens in certain contact cases. And it also certainly appears to be more prevalent in childhood. So a lot of people will have screen memories in their earlier years, and we'll get more into the possible reasons for that in a bit. It can sometimes occur for a period of time and then stop. So they may have a number of years of having screen memories, and then all of a sudden they won't have them, and they may see the beings or craft as they actually are. And then sometimes there can be a gap, and then maybe the screen memories will start up again later on. And screen memories, they can also be referred to as overlays or stealth encounters. So maybe you refer to them as that already, or maybe you've heard that in UFO talks before. So when people are talking about that, that's other terms for screen memories in contact. Right, okay, so we're going to move on to different screen memory types that can occur now. Very creepy picture there. So yeah, first ET screen memories. So I say ET, and I've already explained my personal thoughts on these beings is that they are extraterrestrial. I also believe that they have very advanced multidimensional capabilities. But that's obviously not the only explanation. I just call them ET for short. It's nice and simple, straightforward. So if you hear me mention them and you don't necessarily believe that they're actually from outer space, that's absolutely fine. I don't want to try to impose my views too much. There are many viewpoints on the contact subject and on the UFO subject in general. And there's a lot of unanswered questions with it. And I don't believe that anybody, even people who've looked into many cases, have all the answers. So what can they appear as, the beings that people see in screen memories? They can appear as animals, lots of different types of animals. They can appear as human doctors or surgeons. They can sometimes appear as pilots. Stands to reason because they come from a craft, so they see the link there. They can appear as fictional characters, such as cartoon characters or recognizable characters out of movies or books. They can sometimes appear as figures of authority. So take, for example, police officer or a military officer. They can sometimes appear as clowns or carnival staff. Very interesting. Sometimes they can appear as something more directly recognizable to the individual, such as a family member or their own pet or a friend, perhaps. And then sometimes they can appear as something called silhouettes. And that's something I've come up with specifically. I'll get more into what I mean by that later on. You'll see how that fits in. So let's have a look at the craft that are seen and the screen memories that can occur for different craft. So there's a classic picture there of a saucer-shaped craft, one of the types that's still reported to this day. So craft can appear as a variety of things. I said they can appear not only up close, but sometimes people will have a distant sighting of a UFO, and there still seems to be a screen memory in there. And so they can appear as helicopters or normal Earth aeroplanes. They can sometimes appear as ground vehicles. It's really interesting. They can appear as trucks or lorries and this sort of thing. And that might be representative that the craft has actually landed, but may not always be the case. The interior of the craft can sometimes be represented as a hospital or a surgery. So the entire scenario is masked and they'll see themselves in a hospital. Or sometimes it might be familiar surroundings, such as their own home or a recognizable location. But there might not always be, there might be things that make them think, I'm not actually in my home here, there's something quite off. So how do we see beyond the mask? Well, hypnotic regression is a way of sometimes utilizing and exploring contact cases in depth. I've sat in on a number of hypnotic regressions over the years, and it's a very controversial subject because it's been scientifically proven that you can induce false memories in somebody while they're in a hypnotic state. However, that's not what the regression hypnotherapist tends to do. If they're doing their job right, they'll just ask questions and they'll get all the information back from the individual. They won't interpret things or try to push them in particular directions. And I work with a hypnotherapist here in Birmingham, and he sat in with a number of contact cases, and you're going to see some hypnotic regression transcripts later on in the talk. So under this induced regressive state, the individual, they relive what's taken place, sometimes in very graphic detail. And they can sometimes recall additional details as well, filling in gaps, and that links with the missing time phenomena, which we're not going to delve into too much today, but another aspect that shows up regularly in contact cases, extremely regularly. And sometimes they retrieve these lost memories. And when a screen memory is involved with their experience, they can sometimes fully or partially see through that screen memory. And realize that it's not actually correct, and sort of and see the beings as they actually are, see the craft how it actually looks. And this was actually referenced in the abduction-themed horror movie, The Fourth Kind, which came out quite a number of years ago now. And many of you will have seen that. Now, that film, it wasn't a real case. It was very, very well done. I actually had numerous people contact me asking my opinions on that particular case from the film, and I had to tell them it didn't take place. But it was a bit like the Blair Witch Project, what they did with that. So they made out that it was a real thing that had happened with all handycam footage. But it was very well done, especially the regressions in it were extremely well done. Now, in that, numerous people in the film saw the beings as owls, and we'll get into why that was used shortly as we move into our next section. Let's have a look at animals and how they feed into screen memories. So yeah, the ETs, aliens, beings, however you want to describe them, primarily the greys. I'm sure that leaves no explanation. You'll know who the greys are. They'll sometimes appear in the form of a standard known Earth animal. There's lots of different types that can appear. Owls are quite commonly reported. I've dealt with numerous cases from different countries where they report seeing owls. And that's why they were referenced in The Fourth Kind, because of how common that screen memory is. But there's many other animals that can also be seen. There's some examples. We've got wolves, dogs, cats, deer, rabbits, insects. They've also been reported, and many others as well. And the animal can sometimes appear unusual in a certain way. Say, for example, they may see a mouse, but it might be sort of 4 foot high or 6 foot high or whatever. So it might not look as, it may be representative of an animal, but not quite right. And sometimes it can be recognizable, as I previously said, so it might be their own direct family pet, such as a pet cat or dog. So let's go into a real case example now, where somebody reported seeing an owl. This is it's a repeat contact case, and by that I mean the lady had numerous experiences throughout her life, starting right back in her childhood, coming up to more recent years. Now, I investigated this case right back in 2011. I'd only been investigating about sort of 3 years by that point, so this is one of the earlier cases that I dealt with. And it came from Erdington here in Birmingham, so district of Birmingham, and it involved this lady named Rachel. And by the way, if I mention anybody's names, that's their real names, and they've given me permission to release their names in the case reports and when I talk about their case. If I don't mention their name, it means that I'm holding that back. I always have the witness's confidentiality at the highest point when I investigate cases, and if people don't want certain details going out, I certainly won't share those. It's very, very important. So she actually predicted in advance my investigation, which is a little side point here. This is interesting. When I went across her house, I said, I'm Dave Hodrien from Birmingham UFO Group, and we sat down and started talking. But later on, I mentioned BUFOG, that's the acronym for my group, Birmingham UFO Group. And as soon as I said BUFOG, she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, BUFOG, Birmingham UFO Group. And she said, hold there a second. She went over to a drawer, pulled out this scrap of paper with the word BUFOG in it. Now, she claimed to have written that word down about a year before I'd started speaking with her, and she had no idea what it meant. She was like, what's this, bullfrog or something? And she didn't know what it was, and she put it away in the cupboard. And it seemed like a genuine reaction, and I think that she'd predicted that I was going to be talking with her in advance. Now, contactees, as you may well know, there's a big link with psychic phenomena, psychic type abilities. And many contactees experience premonitions of future events, and it appeared that this might have been a premonition of us getting involved in her case, which is interesting. But she had repeated childhood memories of this white owl that would stare directly into her face, and she'd see it just as she was starting to go off to sleep. She'd be in a period of between sort of waking and sleeping, so she's just settling down for bed, and all of a sudden there'd be this flash, and she'd see this owl's face staring really up close with these black eyes staring at her. And it was very, very terrifying. In fact, it was so frightening to her. Sometimes she would stay awake really, really late until she eventually dropped off through tiredness, just because she didn't want to see it. You know, she was scared she was going to see it. Now, it's very likely to have been visitation or abduction related. Now, if she just had that, let's say she'd just seen this owl's face, she'd be like, okay, it's just a dream, childhood dream, whatever. But the fact is she'd had lots of contact experiences, which we documented in great depth. So it seems very likely that it's a screen memory of seeing beings. And we'll get more into that particular look of that in a bit. Here's another case involving owls. This one's from West Scotland. It involves a mother and her 2 daughters. Back in 2004, the younger of the 2 daughters, she used to play with these Sylvanian family toys. I don't know if you have those across in Queensland, probably do, yeah. So different families of animals, and you can see here the little family of owls. She used to play with those as toys. But she had repeated experiences where she saw full-size versions of these Sylvanian family owls sitting on her cupboard across the room from her. So they were owl-sized essentially, and they would sit on top of the cupboard. You can see there she's drawn in the picture. You can see that she's drawn the clothing that she remembers them wearing, matches the photo there I got online. But what would happen with this is they'd sit there staring at her across on top of the wardrobe, and then all of a sudden they'd take off and they'd fly across the room towards her. And at that point she'd black out and she couldn't remember anything else from the experience, essentially missing time. And so had these vivid recollections. This happened numerous times. And this is also, again, a possible screen memory of visitations that were taking place. And these visitations may well have led on to abductions. She didn't remember the abduction experiences, but I've dealt with so many cases now. I see the similarities with the cases. And often when people black out, that means that they've more's gone on, essentially, that's been purposely blacked out. Well, that's what I personally believe, is that it's being done on purpose. Numerous reasons for that, the same reasons that screen memories are being done, but we'll get more into that in the latter part of the talk. So let's have a look at a completely different case with different animals now. Some wolves. This is another repeat case from Rednall, which is in the outskirts of Birmingham. And the gentleman in this case, he had this recurring nightmare, again in childhood. So you're already starting to see similarities even with these few cases. He'd be walking through his local park and he'd just be on his own, just walking through the trees. And all of a sudden, this pack of wolves that emerged from between the trees and they start running towards him. And obviously he'd be very, very frightened of that, and he'd start running away. He tried to get away, but his legs wouldn't work right. So he'd be running on the spot or running really, really slowly. And the wolves would catch up with him. And at that point, it would end, it'd black out, and that would be all he remembered. Sometimes he'd wake up in a cold sweat, and he'd have this dream repeatedly. Now, later on, he actually had the same dream, but the wolves actually changed to something completely different. So remember this case. We'll come back to this one in a bit. So this is a very odd case. It's the lady is from Southampton, and I actually worked with her. We did a couple of lectures around the country on her case. So we did a joint lecture, and she was brave enough to go kind of semi-public with it. So again, a repeat case, only in 2017. This one, and her name's Tina. Lovely lady, and she'd had a series of abduction recollections in late 2002. So she had this period where she'd get a lot of abductions that all took place one after the other, and you tend to get that. You get them kind of grouped up sometimes. It's a very odd experience. She found herself hanging below this kind of conveyor belt type machinery. Now, I could talk about this incident for hours, but I'm not going to. I'll just give you a brief overview of what happened, essentially. But there were other people. It was almost like some sort of production line of people. There were other people hanging from this thing, both before and behind her. And they appeared to be in a trance-like state. Some of them had their eyes open, but they weren't acting at all. She appeared to be the only one who was awake through this. And it kind of moved along and went past different areas, and she could see alien beings and things, greys essentially working on machinery and things. She came up to this area. There were lots of panels with lights on and things, and groups of greys around these. In the middle of them, there was this one with this. It had a kind of very sort of dark tan skin, and it seemed to notice her, and it noticed that she was awake. It was staring right at her. And it looked kind of almost angry at her that, that she'd woken up, like she wasn't supposed to be awake or something. It ran towards her and it jumped up into the air and it touched her on the forehead. And at this very moment, there was a flash of bright light and she saw an image of a spider, bang, right up close to her eyes. And then it ends, and that's the end of the experience for her. And this is the last thing she can recollect. And we'll get back into why she may have seen that particular thing again later on in the talk. So let's move on to hospitals and doctors next. Very, very interesting. So the beings can sometimes appear as human doctors or surgeons. There's one wearing a face mask, very relevant for today's times. And the craft interiors can sometimes be recollected as a hospital or surgery, and sometimes it be both. So, well, quite often where they see a hospital, they'll also see human doctors around them. So essentially, it just looks like they've been to a hospital, but they know that they haven't, or their family confirmed you haven't had any accidents, you haven't been in hospital. And there's numerous possible reasons for why this might be taking place. But we'll get to that. Here's another absolutely fascinating case, this one. It's a case from Droitwich. It's probably one of the most kind of compelling and interesting cases I've dealt with over the years. It happened back in, I investigated back in 2011. The lady had had experiences from childhood, but in late 2010, she had a couple of abduction experiences within the space of a week of one another. And this, what I'm going to talk about is from the second experience here. She classed them as trigger abduction experiences. What do I mean by that? A trigger experience, a lot of the time, an individual will push these experiences away from their normal life because they're so far out of the normal that they don't want to deal with them. So they push them to the back of their mind. So she'd had lots of stuff happen from childhood, but she never really entertained the notion that there was something going on in her life. When she had these abduction experiences, it was too prevalent, it was too obvious that something strange had gone on. And that got her not only to reach out to our group, but also to go back in time and start looking at some of the previous stuff that had happened to her. And when I went through that with her, it was very obvious that she'd had earlier contact experiences involving other family members as well. I won't go into details of those here. So in this second experience, she found herself in this very strange place. It was kind of almost like a doctor's surgery with these big wood panels all over the walls. There was a double doorway. You can see there, she tried to sketch it on the background. Now at the top left, you can see this question mark. She sensed that there was a being standing up behind her left shoulder, but she couldn't look round at it because she was largely paralyzed. She could move her head a tiny bit, but couldn't move her body. She was lying down on a flattened table or bench of some description, and she was naked. She had a very, very thin sheet draped over her body. To her right was this little chap that she's drawn on a picture there. There was this little doctor guy who was wearing a sort of standard sort of white doctor's coat. He had spectacles. He had very short red hair. Real creepy little chap, about 4 foot high. And she was thinking, what's going on here? Now, this being, this doctor, held out his hands and he performed this scan. There's the presence of the other being she felt behind her, and she actually felt that with the first experience as well, so it was kind of linked between the two experiences. But he performed this kind of body scan. He held his hands over her. It didn't touch her, but he moved his hands down her body and told her various ailments that she's had. So he kind of moved down over her stomach and said, you used to have a stomach ulcer there, but it's cleared up, and this sort of thing. And he was telling her this telepathically, so she couldn't see his mouth moving. She could just hear his voice in her mind, a male voice. And she was very scared. He was going to say something like, you've got cancer or something like that. And in response to her thought on this, she actually heard a voice in her head saying, don't worry, you don't have cancer. So it was like the being could hear her thoughts and was responding directly to them. Now, after this experience, we went across there. The hypnotherapist, it was a previous hypnotherapist, I don't still work with the man, but the hypnotherapist I worked with at the time, we actually went across the lady's house and regressed her. So we performed this regression. I'm now going to read out a small part of that regression transcript where she's talking about this being. It's very fascinating. There's a man. A man? Yeah, on my right side. He's very pale. He has short red hair. What about the shape of his face? It doesn't seem real. His face doesn't seem right. What makes me tell you his face? What makes you tell me that his face doesn't seem real? It's like it wants to fall off. And his arms? What about his arms? They look like normal hands, but they change while I'm looking at what he's doing. You observe his hands change from normal looking hands to just something with 3 fingers. Normal fingers? No, they seem to be pointed. So you can see there in that transcript that she seems to be kind of breaking past this screen memory that this being's put up, saying his face doesn't seem real. It's like it wants to fall off, almost like an actual mask, and she's sort of seeing past it. Absolutely fascinating. And again, you can see she starts describing the hands as human hands, but then she's like, no, they're not right. and the fingers are too long and pointed and this sort of thing. So very, very interesting indeed. Let's go with another case involving doctors. This is one from Ballina in New South Wales. And again, it involves a mother and two daughters, no relation to the West Scotland case at all. The eldest daughter, she at a certain point in her childhood started to develop these nosebleeds as a common side effect or after effect of contact experiences. And by the way, no, I'm not saying that every child that has a nosebleed has had contact or anything like that. Obviously, lots of children can have nosebleeds anyway, you know, but it's a known side effect from certain contact experiences that happen, maybe linked with the implant phenomenon, which we're not going to get into here. So she started to mention to her mother in conversation that these doctors will come for her at night. And when her mum actually asked her, what do these doctors look like? She couldn't remember. She couldn't actually recall what they looked like, yet she referred to them as doctors, which is really, really odd. Obviously, a disparity there going on. And this has very famous similarities to the case, Whitney Strieber's case, the American contactee. They made the famous film Communion from his experiences. And both Whitley and his son started to see these, what they described as little blue doctors that would come for them at night time. And they tried to recreate them for the film. I'm not sure how accurate that was. But one of the reasons why Whitley came to believe that he was having real experiences was that he spoke with his son, and his son described the same beings that he knew that he'd been seeing in the night. And that's what made him entertain the notion that he wasn't just going crazy, because he was very, very skeptical minded at first with his experiences and didn't want to believe that something was taking place. Obviously, it's quite terrifying, that thought, you know, that he was having actual contact and these beings were coming for him. So you can see there, they described them as doctors again. And that might have been because of how they were acting or how they dressed, but they seem to be helping out. Now, Whitley did also see greys, and as well as in his experiences, but these little chaps were actually kind of seemingly helping out the greys conduct some of the abduction experiences and sort of take him to the craft and this sort of thing. Now, they're quite rare. I have dealt with a few cases involving these little guys. They're not often seen, at least not in UK cases. So let's next look at aircraft and pilots. So as I said, in cases where craft is seen, the individual, they can sometimes recall seeing a normal aircraft like a plane or a helicopter, maybe a hand glider, something like that. And when they've had an actual abduction experience and they've been aboard, when they've had actual contact, the beings can sometimes appear as human pilots and sometimes invite them aboard. So they might not see them on the craft like that, but they might actually come out of the craft. I'm going to show you a case where that happened in just a minute. Interestingly, in some of the instances, the aircraft or the pilots that are seen seem to be kind of vintage or retro in nature. So for example, somebody might see a kind of biplane from World War I, or they may see an old-fashioned pilot like that picture on the left with the classic kind of flight goggles and everything. Not how pilots tend to dress today. And there are numerous reasons for why. I don't want to delve too much into why that might be the case, because that's kind of, we'll talk about that in the explanations more, but it's a very, very interesting point to remember there. So yeah, let's have a look at this, another stunning case. By the way, all the cases I'm going over here, every single one, there's a very detailed case reports all on the BUFOG website that you'll be able to check out. So I'm just touching on particular little aspects here from these cases. A lot of these cases are absolutely massive in scope and have got lots of experiences. So yeah, this is a repeat case from Bicester involving this musician, David Hunt, and his friends. David actually went public. Again, I spoke with him numerous times around the country on his experiences. Absolutely fascinating and very detailed contact case. But at age 8, he lived in an area of London called Hillingdon. And he used to go out to this local park, which is still there to this day. It was off Windsor Avenue. And he used to go there with his friend. They called it the Elephant Park because there was a climbing frame there that was the shape of an elephant. So that's how they nicknamed it. This is his witness drawing of what happened. So you can see down the bottom these swings, and that's a roundabout, by the way, not a craft. Him and his friend were sitting there in the park. There's this big open area of grass. There was nobody else there down the park at that time. They were on their own, as is often the case with these experiences. Now, all of a sudden, this object comes flying in. They see it come into their vision. It looked cylindrical. It was a long cylindrical object. It seemed to be rotating. And at one end, it had this kind of round, kind of almost looking like radar dish type looking things. At one very, very strange looking object. And it came in and it descended vertically and landed on the grass on the far side of the grass over there that you can see in this drawing. What happened was two seemingly human pilots. A door opened in the bottom of the thing and two pilots stepped out. They were wearing kind of bomber jackets and these dark shades. They beckoned them over. So they walk across the grass towards us. And the gentleman offered to take them for a ride in this strange craft that had landed. That's what they basically invited them aboard. Now, David's friend Matthew, he was actually very, very frightened. David was okay with this, probably because he'd had previous contact experiences to this, so he was used to weird stuff going on, and he was more fascinated by what was taking place. But his friend was absolutely terrified. He was like, "What the heck is this? You know, who are these strange people? What is going on?" He didn't want to get on this thing. So in the end, David agrees, and they say, "No, we're not going to go." Now they weren't dragged aboard or anything. The pilots seem to be okay with this, and they get back in. Essentially, the door closes. Thing takes off silently off the ground and flies off into the distance and flies away. That's the end of their experience. They go home to their houses. David can't, I don't think he can remember whether he told his parents, but I think they felt like they couldn't tell their parents. Either they wouldn't believe them or they were worried about what might happen. Essentially, in the weeks following this experience, at first, his friend Matthew was open to talking about it, and David would bring it up in conversation with him all the time. Obviously, he would, wouldn't you? But as the weeks went on, his friend became colder and colder towards talking about this and refused to talk about it. It was almost like trying to block it out of his mind, like it hadn't taken place. After that, Dave actually he moved away from the area. But a number of years later, I believe it was about 8 to 10 years later, he actually went back there on a visit to London and happened to bump into his old friend. And he brought up the incident again with him, just to see if he was okay now with talking about it after so many years had gone on. And at this point, he found out that him and his friend had different recollections of the experience, only part of it. What had happened was his friend, when he talked to his friend, Matthew said that helicopter landed and those pilots got out, and it turned out that his friend he remembered it as a helicopter, not as this strange cylindrical object. So it almost seems like David could see it as it actually was for whatever reason. His friend couldn't see the craft as it actually was, remembered a helicopter, but they both remembered seeing human pilots get out, which is really interesting. And that might seem to imply that where you've got multiple witnesses, the screen memories can vary. And I've dealt with other cases where exactly the same things happen to that. But while we're talking about helicopters, here's another fascinating case. This is from Swansea in Wales. And it involves this lady named Kerry. And she used to live in the Belgian Congo, believe it or not, in a place called Katanga before moving to the UK. Again, age 8, right back in 1955. She used to go to Le Col de Sez primary school. She had this vivid memory one day. She recalled that on the previous day, a helicopter had seemingly landed in a playground. And a chap had got out of it, sort of pilot had got out and essentially invited her aboard. And when the pilot got out, she realised it was one of her neighbours. Well, one of her neighbours actually gave helicopter tours around the local area, so that would seem to fit. So she thought, okay, it's my neighbour. Why is he landed at school? Whatever, you don't ask questions, do you, at age 8? So she goes for a ride with him in this helicopter, and she remembers taking off in the helicopter, flying around and looking out the windows and seeing the ground down below. But interestingly, she doesn't remember it landing again. She doesn't remember being dropped back off. She just remembers being up in there, which is an odd thing. But when she got home, she told her mother about this. Sorry, when she got home, the next day, she told her mother about this recollection. And her mum was obviously very, very angry at this and was like, what on earth, what is going on here? Obviously stormed around the next door neighbours, what are you doing landing at the school? Now, it's just completely irrelevant, of course, and it's a very odd thing. Why would that happen? And of course, he denied it happening because it didn't happen. Why on earth would he have done that? It wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, logically, no sense for him to have done that at all. And she actually went for, before we move on to this, she actually went for a regression. I don't have the transcript on this regression, but she informed me she'd gone for a regression. And under regression, she saw it as a silver coloured disc, saucer disc with a grey. So that was what the helicopter and pilot turned out to be under regression. So an obvious screen memory going on there. So next, let's look at fictional characters. So sometimes the beings can appear as something that's not even real, which is absolutely fascinating. So it's usually something that's familiar to them. So take, for example, a book that they're reading, or maybe a TV show that they like. And it can include a storybook or TV characters, figures wearing recognizable outfits, take, for example, a pirate or something like that, or a ninja, or a cartoon character. And this is certainly more prevalent in childhood years. In the majority of cases where they're remembering a fictional character, it seems to be from childhood. And it's not always friendly, so sometimes they can see the beings as some kind of horrible monster, like a demon or a gremlin or something that's coming to get them. Now, this was actually referenced in the amazing abduction TV series, Taken. I don't know if some of you have probably seen that. If you haven't seen it, I think it's certainly the best fictional recreation of the concept subject in TV form. It's a 10-part series that Spielberg released quite a few years ago now. His take on the contact phenomena, and it's absolutely superb. But in that, the boys saw this. This small, it was a squirrel from a book he was reading at the time, and I did have a photo. I don't know why that hasn't come up, but yeah, it was this squirrel wearing this blue clothing that took him off to its kind of tree house, and then it changed into a craft and took off. And he referenced screen memories numerous times in it. I'll talk about that later on. Again, his other reference to that particular aspect of the subject. So, with this case. This is a case from local to you guys. It's a case from Australia. Investigated it right back in 2009. I won't say where in Australia because the gentleman involved didn't want that released. He was very adamant that a lot of his details were held back. But he had many experiences right back to his childhood. Again, you can find this case on the website if you want to read more. He wanted to explore his earliest memories. He thought that he probably had sort of missing time involved and had references that he thought that certainly stuff had probably happened that he couldn't remember. So he decided to go for a regression. Didn't want to come all the way to the UK for that. Obviously, it costs a lot of money to get on a plane to come across here. So he decided to get regressed across in Australia. Under regression, he came out with these particular details of these visitation experiences that had happened when he was quite young, and I was sent the audio recording of the regression and was able to transcribe it. And I've got now again another transcript from this incident. They stuck a needle in my ear. Okay. What was that for? Ask them why. A needle in my ear. Stuck a needle in my ear. Who? Little guys with big round heads. They're happy and they're wearing red. Okay, this is crazy. How old are you? Going back to about 3. Keep going. Why did they do that? What was the reason? Because they care about me and they like me. They said, this won't hurt. And it did hurt. Okay, why were they sticking a needle in your ear? What was that about? It's DNA. It's not blood. What's it for? What's it going to do? They're checking me. That's what they're doing. We're just checking to see how you're going. It won't hurt. It's okay. What did you do at school today? Ah, needle. It's a needle. It's very skinny, very little. Can't hardly see it. What are you doing this for? Oh, we're just checking you. We care about you. We're just checking you. It's okay. We do this all the time. When all the time? Oh, when you're asleep. He's making himself look like Casper and Elmer Fudd. Why do they do that? Well, we're playing. You're playing games with them. I'm allowed to do that. Do they like that? Not sure. They don't want me to worry. Elmer Fudd had me fooled. You know, their eyes aren't always black. What other colours are they? I was looking at Elmer Fudd and all of a sudden it's a big head and the eyes were down here and they weren't covered in black. They were not like cartoon eyes, but they're hard to describe. Oh, isn't that fascinating? So you saw the being putting on this appearance of these 2 different cartoon characters. And you can see there the similarity between those 2 characters and how a grey looks, especially with the Casper ghost on the left-hand side. And we'll get more into the potential reason for that in a bit. Here's another case. This one's from the UK. Very, very good case from Leeds. Involved a man named Simon. Also involved the hybrid program, which some of you will be aware of. I won't delve into hybrids too much with this talk because it moves away from what we're trying to discuss. From age 3, he began to experience these visitations that would happen at night time. He'd be in bed and he'd sense this horrible foreboding presence in the room, as many experiences start. At this point he would hide underneath his covers. So note that he wasn't paralyzed, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. He could move freely. So he'd hide under the covers, but in the end he'd have to look and he'd have to peek because it just got too much. And so he'd look, and there'd be a being standing alongside his bed. This is a witness drawing he's done of that being. It's called Pirate, looking under the bedclothes. So it had a very strange face, wide oval-shaped face, had this olive-coloured skin, but he said it could have been lighter, and it potentially was the shadowing in the room that made it seem darker than it was. But very interestingly, they said the skin looked almost rubber-like, like this rubbery puppet thing. And it had this black eye patch over his left eye, like a pirate's eye patch. So you've seen it with the pirate's eye patch on, and yet most of the being was obviously, non-human. Very, very interesting indeed. Let's have a look at figures of authority. Very creepy picture there, potentially of the men in black. We'll get more on that in a second. So in some cases, the witness can remember the beings as a human individual, somebody who exudes a particular authority. Take, for example, a police officer, a fireman, military, or just a gentleman in a smart suit. And that might be responsible for some of the Men in Black sightings that appear. Incidentally, I certainly believe that the Men in Black are a real aspect of the contact subject. I've dealt with quite a number of cases that seem to involve levels of surveillance, and I don't exactly. There's numerous explanations for what they possibly are. It might be multiple things going on at once, but one of those explanations could be that in some instances, the Men in Black scene are actually the beings putting on a screen memory of a figure in a suit. And some of the incidents might also be the result of MyLabs, not screen memories. Now, you may have heard of what MyLabs are. Lesser known aspect of the subject, stands for military abduction. And this is where people describe seeing human soldiers working alongside alien beings. Very controversial aspect to the subject, and potentially points towards something going on behind the scenes there. You don't get it happen too much in the UK, but I have dealt with a few cases that involve that, including that Droitwich case that I spoke of earlier on that involved a MyLab experience. But it's quite rare. There's a lot more cases in America. I'm not sure how many cases you get in Australia. You might be able to tell me a bit about that later on. So we're going to return now to the Bicester case, the repeated case with David Hunt. And between the ages of 6 and 9, he had a number of experiences where these American soldiers would come out of his bedroom wall. He tried to draw a sketch of it. Not a great sketch, but this is his bedroom. He's lying down on the bed to the left. That's him lying down there. And the stick figures to the right are these soldiers. They would emerge from the wall over by his door, and then they'd move on around the side of the bed. He's trying to draw an arrow down the bottom there. And they'd stand alongside the bed and just stare intently at him. This was very frightening, of course. So were these gentlemen, why were they looking at him so intently? And he was too frightened to shout out for his parents. He doesn't think he was paralyzed. He thinks he could have moved, but he was kind of just sitting there just watching this. And then he'd black out. And that would be the end of the recollection. Next thing he knows, it's morning time. He's waking up as normal. Now, it's a probable screen memory, that, and I'll get to the reasons why I think that that's a screen memory later on. But again, it feeds into one of the explanations there. We're back now with the Erdington case, Rachel in Erdington, where she saw the owl as a child. She had another abduction experience occurred in the mid-90s, and with this one, she'd gone camping with her husband to Scotland, just camping in a tent. She woke up in the middle of the night to hear this strange whirring sound. At first, she thought it might be a helicopter or a car or something, but there was this white light as well that was coming up. She thought maybe the white light was a car moving around, somebody's turned up to the campsite late and they're just driving around, but there was no sound at all. There was she starts to hear this whirring noise, as I mentioned, but there was no billowing of the tent, and it felt like if there was a helicopter nearby, it would have kind of been billowing around. There was no air current at all. She looks outside the tent. There's these two figures standing there in white light, and she gets out. She's not particularly frightened. She's just wondering what's going on. She gets out, crawls out the tent, seem to be wearing these dark bomber jackets and trousers. There's this bright white light coming from behind them, kind of sort of partially blocking their view, but they seem to be human. She gets out involuntarily, and the men are kind of checking her over, almost like when you go to an airport on holiday and they do the scan, like that sort of thing. She's looking up and down. She looks over to her right, and there's another chap from the campsite, and he's just standing there with this bewildered look on his face, like, what on earth's going on here? And then she actually witnesses him get abducted. She sees a white beam of light suddenly come down around the figure. He kind of goes into this trance-like state and starts to lift off the floor in front of her. Next thing she knows, bang, there's white lights all around her. She senses this feeling of lifting off the ground herself. She has a period of missing time. It's known as travel amnesia. So it happens so regularly. People record being on the ground, seeing a craft maybe. They record being in the craft, but a lot of the time, the space in between is blanked out, travel amnesia. So she next finds herself in this very, very tight, kind of constrictive, dull metallic room. More happen with that afterwards, an examination procedure I won't go into because it moves away from screen memories, but you can see there that it seems to be an abduction where they seem to be putting a screen memory of these human figures in kind of sort of smart clothing. So other human figures that are sometimes seen are clowns or carnival staff. I do apologise for the very, very creepy picture of that clown there. Don't have nightmares. So there's numerous cases where the beings have appeared as these clowns or carnival staff, and this can sometimes lead to this ongoing phobia of clowns later in life. And there can also be other sort of similar type phobias, to, for example, of porcelain dolls with this kind of pale faces and this sort of thing. And the craft can sometimes be recollected as circus trucks, which are really interesting because obviously craft usually would be up in the air. They recall seeing kind of circus trucks. And again, this was referenced in Taken, the Steven Spielberg series. It was the same boy that as a child has seen this kind of squirrel from one of his storybooks. And later on, he sees these circus trucks that are actually UFOs that then take him aboard. Stunning series, as I said. So back to that recurring nightmare of the contactee from Rednall, where you saw the wolves, which you talked about earlier on. So I said that after a while, the dream changed, and it did. The wolves actually changed. Instead of the wolves, he saw this jester's face, like a giant floating face of a jester with a kind of long hat with a bell and a kind of hooked nose and big grin on its face. And it's very, very similar to Punch. And Judy, I found this picture of Punch online. You can see how similar that is to the witness drawing that he'd done many years before. And the rest of the dream remained exactly the same. So this big floating head was essentially chasing him, couldn't run away from it. It would catch up with him and he'd black out. And that would be the end of the recollection. So it's interesting that he had this dream, and it seemed to involve two different types of known screen memories that can occur with cases. So we'll look at more recognisable screen memories now, such as particular family members. So the beings can sometimes appear as one of the contactee's own relatives, or perhaps a recognisable friend or a neighbour, as we heard with the helicopter. So you can already see all these links going on between these cases. So there might be something else personal as well, like even a pet. And the interior of the craft can be something familiar to them, like their own house, but it's sometimes a bit odd, like maybe the sizing of everything's wrong, or maybe things are in the wrong locations and this sort of thing. So they realise there's something up about it. Let's return to the Droitwich case now with the two incidents in the space of a week. This is from the first abduction, the first of those two abductions. With this initial experience, the lady found herself floating inside this darkened area. It was very odd. There were kind of these glowing grid lines all around her, and I've reached out to other experts in the contact field to see if we can find other similar cases, and so far it's come up a blank. But it was almost reminded of Tron. There were kind of glowing yellow squares all around her wherever she looked, and she's free floating, completely naked this time. She can sense the presence of these small beings down either side of her, but she can't really see them. She can't, because she's paralyzed, so she's trying to look down, but she can't really see them. She senses this tall one up behind her shoulder as well. She doesn't know how she knows it was tall, but she kind of sensed it was there. And I suppose just intuition. But she underwent this examination procedure where those beings were kind of touching down her body. And then in the distance, all of a sudden, this white light, rectangular light opens. It's a doorway opening in the edge of the room. And there's this white light pouring in. And in the light, here's a sun. Now, I actually met her son when I went across the house. He's quite a tall chap, he's about sort of 6.5 foot high. Really tall guy, and very nice. And he was standing there in this doorway, and she was really puzzled. She was like, what is going on? I'm in this really strange location. What's my son doing here as well? It's really bizarre. He's not talking or interacting with me in any way. Now, under regression, you can already guess what's going to happen here. She came out with other details, and it wasn't her son. So let's see what she said here. There's somebody standing in the light. It looks like my son. Your son is standing in the light. It's too tall. It's too tall for your son. Yeah. How tall is your son? About 6'5". How tall is this thing standing in front of you? 7 feet, 8 feet. He has the features and the build of your son. Is that correct? No, he's very skinny. He doesn't have clothes on. How does he look facially? His face looks soft. He doesn't scare me. He's talking, but not with his mouth. I can hear him, but I don't know what he's saying. He's wanting them to hurry. He wants to know why I'm still here. He has big eyes. They're black, and he looks kind. And this was a drawing that the lady did immediately after that regression. So she went and as soon as she was back with us, we got to draw that. So you can see they're definitely not her son, a very, very tall, slender, grey being. And these taller beings were actually referenced by Steven Spielberg in his infamous film, The Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So with that, if you remember, when the main craft opened at the end, there were lots and lots of small beings, but in the middle of them, there was one very, very tall being. And that was him referencing that particular aspect of the subject. So let's move on and have a look at silhouettes, the last type of screen memory I'm going to go over with you today. So this is very interesting, but there's numerous cases on record where the beings they're a recognizable shape. So by that, I mean, they might obviously look exactly as a grey looks. So they have a large cranium, very thin neck, about child height. So obviously looking like greys, but they're in shadow with no features distinguishable. And now, obviously, sometimes that can be down to the lighting in the room. So let's say they're coming to them in their bedroom at night. It might be because it's very dark in the room. But in some cases, it's light enough that they should definitely be able to make out details, such as, for example, their eyes, certain details. And yet they're not. They're almost like black cardboard cutouts. Now, this isn't to be confused with shadow beings. So by shadow beings, I mean, it's kind of, it feeds into the paranormal, but a lot of contactees see these kind of shadowy forms in the vicinity, usually kind of very tall, kind of monk-like characters wearing hooded robes. And they're seen very, very frequently by people. I've dealt with lots of cases involving that. And it links into the paranormal aspect of the contact subject, of which there is a very, very direct crossover. But again, that's for another time. But other times, the body of the figure is clear, so they can see the being's body. They can see what clothing it's wearing, maybe see a belt around it or whatever, or its feet or its hands. But when they look up to the face is all blacked out, or sometimes even blurred out, almost like censorship, like you get on television, which is really fascinating. Now, here's some examples. These are 3 completely individual cases. And you can see there that these people who don't know each other at all have drawn very, very similar things there. They've all drawn these kind of black faces, just kind of cut out where they can see the shape, but they can't see any detail. This Huddersfield one, it's up right next to the bed that was peeping over the side of the bed, so it's right there next to her. And all she can see is this black shape. In the second one, you can see in the Henny and Arden case there, you can see there's a baby. That was a hybrid baby that the being was bringing to her. Again, not going to delve too much into that particular aspect of the subject. I'm sure many of you have heard of that before. So what is going on with this? Let's have a look at some of the examples. You've seen there lots of different case examples, lots of different screen memory types there. And there's numerous examples of what might be taking place with this. And I'm going to go over these now in depth with you. You may already have your viewpoints as to which of these you think might be happening. So screen memories are either going to be something happening naturally, or they're going to be happening something that's being done on purpose. So let's have a look at these. We've got unintentional explanations for screen memories. So the trauma of the situation, so how frightened the person is of what's taking place. We're going to look at something called archetypes. And you probably haven't heard of that, but we'll get into what I mean by that. And we're going to look at altered states of perception or chemical changes in the brain. And then we've got our intentional explanations. First of all, a memory overlay, so something that beings are projecting on purpose. And then we're also going to look at actual shape shifting, so the being's actually changing shape. So let's have a look at our first explanation here. Explanation: screen memories naturally occur as a result of the trauma of the situation. So this immediately feeds back to our introduction, doesn't it, with the scientific viewpoint for what's happening with screen memories. So various neurologists over the years have highlighted the element of psychological trauma that underpins the screen memory phenomena as they see it. This is a quote from Otto Feinschl from the Psychoanalytic Theory of Neurosis right back in 1945, another scientific paper that was released. The construction of the screen memory turns on the balance between memory and denial. The blocking of an unpleasant event, thought, or perception is facilitated if some harmless but associated object can be substituted for the unpleasantness itself. The ego searches for memories that can serve as screens for the unpleasantness behind, which is thereby removed from consciousness. Quite a mouthful there, but you can see what he's getting at with that. And here's a quote here from our old friend Sigmund Freud. They may be considered essentially defensive in nature. Their illusory aspect tends to infect all remembering, which thus may always be suspected of having a screen function. That's from his famous paper, to what I believe the first paper released on screen memories. So, of course, contact experiences are, of course, extremely bizarre. People see non-human entities, very, very strange surroundings. There's often very little communication or no communication at all with these beings. People undergo horrific procedures that can sometimes be very, very frightening. Now, despite the fact that some contact experiences may be viewed in a positive light, a lot of the time they are nightmarish. Now, I'm not saying so. By that, I'm saying that I've dealt with a lot of contact cases where the individual is either kind of more adjusted to what's going on and trusts the beings more, or they've always seen the experiences as quite positive in nature. And this can sometimes be due to the type of being, the species, if you will, that they're having these experiences with, or it can sometimes be due to what the beings are or aren't doing with them, or how open they're being with them. So there's various reasons that would push it in a kind of more positive slant. But there is a lot of people who are extremely frightened of their experiences because of a lot of the time due to the misunderstanding of what's happening to them, and the fact that if it's real, it's absolutely, of course, very, very terrifying for most people. That would be. So false memories may be recreated in these cases by their mind to help understand and overcome the fear of the situation. So screen memories are also more common in childhood years, as you said. So is this because the experiences are more traumatic as a child, like they haven't looked into the UFO subject at all, or maybe as an adult they're able to kind of entertain the notion of them being real better? So maybe as a child it's more traumatic, so therefore there's a higher probability of these screen memories occurring. Maybe that's what's going on with this. Sometimes these screen memories are of something particularly frightening. We looked at the Rednall case where he saw the pack of wolves chasing him, or the spider case in Southampton. Now, Tina actually had a phobia of spiders. She thinks it was from before this experience. So was the screen memory of a spider because she was arachnophobic? Maybe. So let's next look at reminiscence. So in some cases, the screen memory replacing the beings is evocative of their actual appearance, such as, for example, the hospitals and doctors that I mentioned early on. And of course, Barnell across there. In this case, that we looked into with the landing craft down the park, both the witnesses, they saw these pilots wearing these dark shades. And again, in the Leeds case, which we talked about, he saw the pilot peeping under his bed with this black eye patch. Now, were these because they saw the large black eyes of a grey being and associated it with like either a pirate eye patch or dark sunshades, and that's why they were seeing it? Now, obviously, you've got your barn owl. The similarity of a barn owl's face is undeniable. Of course, the pale feathers with these very dark eyes in between. So you can see the similarities there, and I'm just going to change that there to a grey just so you can see how similar that is. And baby barn owls, they look extremely alien indeed. I've got a little video here. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. So yeah, it's a video of some baby barn owls and how they look. Check this out. So yeah, yeah, you can see there. Oh, it's going again. Sorry, 1 second. Move on. There we go. So yeah, you can see there with the baby barnhouse. I've actually seen that video passed around online as an alien video. People saying there's aliens caught on camera. And it's obviously baby barnhouse, but you can see there without their feathers how alien they look. Let's have a look at pareidolia next. So this is the tendency for incorrect perception of a stimulus as an object, pattern, or meaning known to the observer. So our brain's essentially seeing something else that isn't there. It's derived from the Greek words para and eidolon, which means alongside, and an image or form. Is a subcategory of something known as apophenia, which is a tendency to mistakenly perceive connections between completely unrelated things. And it's very common for people to see faces or maybe kind of whole figures of people in random patterns of light and shadow. And I'm regularly sent photographs claiming to show alien beings, or people saying, can you see the alien? Can you see the ghost? And this sort of thing. And there's nothing there. It's just light and shadow that reminds people of a face. And it used to be viewed as a sign of psychosis in the past, but it's now considered completely normal. And I can guarantee that all of you will have had this happen at least one time. There's a well-known example here, the man in the moon, of course. Now, there's no face on the moon. It's just patterns of light and dark. It's just areas of rock of different colors. But of course, we see a face, a human face in that, and that gave the man in the moon there, with it highlighted there on the right. And I've got some other great examples here of pareidolia. These are all real photographs, by the way. So you may have seen this one before. This one's very, very famous, one of the most famous and very strong pareidolia images. So you can see there, surely you can see the bearded man facing to the left, can't you? You can see his eye there, his hair coming down. You can see his nose and some longish beard. Some people say it kind of might look a bit like Jesus. That's not a face at all. What you're looking at is a baby sitting on a man's lap. You may not even be able to see it after I tell you. The top bit is the hat on the baby's head. The dark hair underneath, which looks like the eye, is the baby's face, and it's wearing a white top. And you can probably start to see it now. And it's a baby wearing white clothing sitting on the gentleman's lap. But how powerful does that look? I mean, so, you look at that and you see a face looking to the left straight away. And you still might not be able to see that now. So here's another one. This is just a cloud. Just a cloud. There's no face there. That's a cloud. This is a really creepy one. So I do apologise for the low quality of this image. It's obviously an old photograph, but very, very creepy. You can see here what appears to be this small skeletal figure reaching out and grabbing the left shoulder of this woman, who's considered skull-like face with the eyes and the mouth, and so their arm seems to be up in the air. Really, really creepy. But there's nothing there. There's just a bush. I guarantee you that's just a bush. It's light and dark. But our brain is picking up the shape and making this kind of creepy spectre image from it. And some people have been shown that without being told about it looking like a skeletal spectre and not seen that. So there's might be some proof there. There's an elephant here. How fascinating is that? Doesn't that look just like a face again, facing to the left? But yeah, it's just near. And yeah, no prizes for guessing what that looks like. That is just a tree, nothing more. So this is linked with something known as the Rorschach test, which some of you have heard of before. It's a psychometric examination of the pareidolia phenomenon. It's named after the creator of it, the psychologist Hermann Rorschach from Switzerland. And it's this test in which the test subject is shown random blots of ink on a page. And then they use what they can see in that ink to try to determine their emotional state or their personality traits. There's an example of the Rorschach test. That's one of the most famous images from it. So what do you see? By the way, no, I'm not going to tell you what your personality is based on what you see in that. But if you have a good look, you can probably start to pick out all sorts of different things in it. Very, very interesting. So while neither reminiscence nor pareidolia are going to be fully responsible for screen memories, they may well play a part in determining what is or isn't recollected with those screen memory experiences. So let's look at our next explanation now. Screen memories are naturally derived from what's known as archetypes. So what do we mean by this? Archetypes are universal images or symbols that are derived from what's known as the collective unconscious. And this is innate, unspecific knowledge passed down through human evolution. So it's a very controversial subject, and a lot of scientists don't agree with it at all. But there's some scientists who believe that we pass down information genetically from birth without being shown it in our lives or told about it. So inherited directly. The theory was proposed initially by Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, photo of him there. And this is a quote from him: archetypes may affect conscious experiences or recollection of those experiences. These images must be thought of as lacking in solid content, hence as unconscious. They only acquire solidity, influence, and eventual consciousness in the encounter with empirical facts. So he's saying that at first they don't exist, and they only come into being when people see things that remind them of these archetypes. Now, there's a number of archetypes on record that are kind of commonly described. And two of the most well-known ones are something known as the trickster and the shadow. And this is interesting because it has links with two of the different types of screen memories that we talked about earlier on, clowns and also these silhouette phenomena. So let's have a look at the trickster. Here we go. We've got the punch-like head again, a character in a story who exhibits a great degree of intellect or secret knowledge, and he uses it to play tricks on people, almost like the infamous god Loki. And then you've got the shadow, one's dark side, aspects that exist but are not acknowledged, that people don't want to identify with. And now, isn't it interesting that these two known archetypes seem to fit there with two of the screen memory types? I'm not saying this is definitely the explanation, but there's this odd crossover between them that I found there. Let's have a look at our next explanation. Screen memories naturally occur as a result of altered perception or chemical changes going on in the brain. So first of all, I will say this: it's very unreasonable and also unrealistic to assume that contactees are mentally unwell. Many of them have been scientifically tested. People who've had contact experiences have assumed, oh, I might be going a bit mad here, I'm going to go and get checked out. And they've had tests and proved to be completely and utterly normal. Yeah, I'm not saying that there aren't cases on record where mentally unwell people could experience something like contact, but in the majority of the time, this is happening in irregular folk who are not mentally unwell. And it's one of the common explanations bandied around by skeptics, and I very, very much dislike it for numerous reasons. I talk with these people and they're everyday folk. There's evidence which suggests that when people experience contact, their state of perception is somehow altered, and this is very, very common indeed. So people a lot of the time they act extremely complacent to what's taking place, and this is one of the reasons why there's very few photographs or videos or anything seemingly showing contact or these beings. So a lot of the time skeptics are saying, okay, everybody's got mobile phones on them these days, how come there's not hundreds of photographs of beings coming into people's rooms or photographs from aboard craft and this sort of thing? Yeah, and this is the reason for it, is that most of the time when people experience contact, they're not acting normal. They act almost, they kind of go along with what's happening and don't really kind of act in a normal manner. And sometimes afterwards they can realize this. Going back to that Droitwich case, the actual first experience, the first abduction experience that she had with the glowing grid lines, yeah, it started with a UFO sighting, as many contact cases do. She saw it at a distance at first. It was a glowing orange oval-shaped object in the distance over. She looked out of her daughter's bedroom window and saw it in the distance. All of a sudden, she looks away, and when she looks back, this thing has jumped, and it's now down in the field about 100 yards away from her house, and she could see this large bank of white lights with some kind of object behind it that she can't really see because of the glow. So she tried to draw it there. Now, what would you do in that situation? Is something right near your house? What would you do? You'd call the police. You'd wake up your family. You might contact the MOD or authorities and sort of say there's something outside the house. You may run out of the house and get out of the area. She doesn't do any of that. She just accepts it and goes back to bed almost like it's an everyday occurrence. And it was after she got back to bed that she had her abduction experience. So perception creates this hypothesis of what our brain sees based on the sensory information that's passed to it. Everything that we see, all our senses, all it is electrical signals at the end of the day. Now, a famous example of this is optical illusions, of course, where the brain decodes something it sees as something different. So it might see shapes that aren't actually there and this sort of thing, or sees things that don't seem right. I've got a famous example here, the Ames room illusion. This is a picture of me and my partner, Tash. We went to an optical illusions museum in Paris very shortly before the lockdown. This was about a month before the lockdown. So in that, you can see that room is a very odd shape, and the shape of the room is making it look like I'm about half the size of Tash. Very, very interesting, a very powerful illusion. I'm actually much further away from her in that image. So under an altered state of perception, it might be possible for the brain to perceive incorrect memories. You know, if you're in this altered state, who knows what might change as part of that altered state. So that's what's going on here with it. It's also known there's a variety of psychedelic substances and medications that produce very, very strong visual hallucinogenic effects. And so perhaps when the individual's within close proximity to these beings or their craft, there's some kind of natural chemical change that takes place. And maybe these changes lead to altered memories and in certain circumstances. And if this is the case, maybe some people have a natural tolerance to this. And when they have this natural tolerance to it, they experience contact and see the beings and craft for how they are. And when they don't have a tolerance to it, that's where the changes occur. As an example, in 1935, the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, he experimented with this drug called mescaline on purpose as a scientific experiment. And for weeks afterwards, it changed his visual perception. So it was an elongated trip, essentially. And he wrote down how his visual perception changed. And when he looked at clock faces, like on a grandfather clock, he'd see them as the face of an owl. Isn't that interesting? Again, we've got our link back with screen memories. So this also, of course, links to reminiscence of pareidolia. So he may have been seeing the clock face, and because of the black and white of it and everything, it reminded him of an owl's rounded face, and that's why he saw that. But some scientists believe that hallucinations might also be the result of imposing predictions on the world, essentially the brain coming up with a screen memory for itself. So we've looked there at a number of examples where the screen memories might be something naturally occurring, not on purpose. But next, let's have a look at other explanations where the beings might be doing this themselves. So screen memories are employed directly by the beings themselves. So it's very possible that the beings may link with telepathically into the individual's mind and essentially go fishing for information, go fishing for something that's familiar to the individual, something that they can disguise themselves as. And this might be why many screen memories are something recognizable to the contactee. Of course, we've seen the actual examples of that. There's possible reasons for why they might be doing this. Could be to reduce the trauma of the experience. So essentially, so they can go about what they're doing and the individual won't be frightened. They can go on with their life and try to reduce the fear of it. It might be to prevent the contactee from directly panicking aboard the craft or retaliating. And there's some cases on record, like the infamous Travis Walton case. Now, in that contact case, Travis actually punched one of the beings. So, because he found he could move and he started panicking towards what was happening. So do they do this to prevent that panic from setting in? Or maybe it's to maintain this covert agenda. So it's my personal belief that that they're doing this on a covert level. I don't believe it's in any way a coincidence that the majority of contact cases either happen in the dead of night or in very rural locations where nobody else is around. Now, there is certain cases on record, such as the infamous Brooklyn Bridge incident, where people have observed an abduction take place. And we mentioned that Scottish case earlier on where she saw somebody else get taken just before getting taken herself. But sometimes there's cases on record where people completely independent from the experience can actually see it happen. But in most cases, I don't see it. And I think that's because it's being done covertly. They don't really want the planet to be fully aware of this. So is the screen memory something to do with that? Missing time also occurs in a majority of contact cases, either fully, partially, or maybe very, very fragmented. So in most cases, people won't remember the full details from start to finish. There'll be gaps in the memory. So is that being employed for the same reasons? I won't delve too much into missing time, but it's possible that they intend for the experience to be fully wiped out from the individual's mind, but the human brain brings it back and it doesn't always work right. There's some cases where the craft has been seen at a distance and yet a screen memory is still being seen. So they might have seen an old-fashioned plane or whatever. It's not particularly frightening if you see, I mean, obviously it's unusual to see a UFO, but let's say it's like a mile away in the sky or something. It wouldn't frighten most people. So, in that case, why would there be a screen memory if it's not trauma related? There's other cases where the individual's not afraid of the ET. So as I said, there's many cases on record where the individual views their experiences as quite positive in nature, yet the beings have still appeared to them. The screen memories maybe sort of temporarily and then later on not. As examples where the contactee is aware that the beings have intentionally changed their appearance, such as in the Australian case. There's a quote from that transcript. He's making himself look like Casper and Elmer Fudd. So the person under regression, he knew that the being was putting on these appearances itself, but that it was also a being. This is really odd. There's cases where the beings are directly confirmed they are the thing that the contactee is seeing. And I'm sorry, it sounds like a mouthful. Okay, so we go back to the Droitwich case of the second trigger experience. The lady says, I know he's not what he says he is. What does he say he is? Tell me, what does he say he is to you? A doctor. Does he verbalize he's a doctor? Yeah. So in that, what the lady said is that the being has told her it's a doctor. So she's not only seeing it as a doctor, but that's what he says he is telepathically to her. But then the screen memory was kind of broken through using the regression. There's also many possible examples of memory phishing. You can see we've seen the. I didn't mention the pet dogs. Sorry, that shouldn't be there. Essentially, it was a case from Bletchley, one of the first contact cases I investigated, and the gentleman saw two of his pet dog, like two identical pet dogs, standing on their hind legs. Really bizarre. There's the Bicester case. He saw the soldiers coming out of the wall. We've got the Spider case in Southampton, and the son aboard the craft. And also there was another thing that I mentioned a couple of things that I didn't go over. There was another screen memory involving a hybrid baby with that Leeds case. So let's look at our last explanation here. Screen memories are actually down to beings or craft actually physically changing shape. So many people believe that the ET species or type known as the reptilians have this ability to kind of shapeshift to and from human form. I've dealt with a number of contact experiences involving this particular type or species of being, so I certainly believe that they're real. There's lots of different viewpoints about what they're actually doing. Some people take it down a kind of very conspiratorial level and sort of think that they're trying to take over the planet and hiding as government agents and that sort of thing. There's many different viewpoints about them. I certainly believe this, that they're a real type. There's cases where this contactees witnessed this directly, where they've seemingly witnessed a shapeshift occur, or where that's been implied, essentially. There's cases where the UFOs have also seemed to change shape. So sometimes that can be down to the angle that they're looking at the craft. So obviously, if you look straight up at a disc, it's going to appear like a circle, but as it moves away, it's going to turn into say a cigar shape or something like that. But there's other cases where the UFO hasn't really moved much, but they've seen it literally change form in front of them. They may still explore the mind of the contactee with this to aid in deciding what shape that they want to take. It doesn't kind of completely remove that. And there's also something called walk-ins, another rare aspect of the contact subject. And walk-ins is where people seem to physically or visually change shape. Either they'll see themselves do it in a mirror for sort of a brief moment, or sometimes other independent witnesses have watched people temporarily kind of change. So maybe their eyes have changed to kind of lizard-like eyes with sort of slits in, or a grey, and that sort of thing. It's very rare. I've dealt with a number of cases, and it may again involve shape-shifting. So let's have a look at an example here, a repeat contact case from Wakefield from back in 2013. This involved a gentleman who owned this property on the shore of this lake in Turkey called Lake Tuzla, and he'd sometimes go there for holiday breaks. In June 2011, he was on his holiday there when he had a contact experience. He woke up in the middle of the night and sensed that there was something not quite right, there was something going on. And it's really bizarre. He tried to ignore it, but there was this dim light coming from his left side from behind him. It started to appear and started to get brighter and brighter. He rolled over in bed. It's really strange. There was a man lying there alongside, on top of the bed sheets, a Mediterranean-looking chap lying there, with his head propped up on his arm like that next to him. Really bizarre. And because of his previous contact experiences, he knew that this wasn't right, and he knew that it was an alien being masking its appearance to him, essentially. And he was actually quite angry at this, because he wanted to open conversation with these beings and to learn more about what was happening to him. So he actually said this to the being. He said, "Why have you come to me as a human? You're not what you appear to be. If you return, come in your natural form." And with that, he then blacks out. Later the same night, he comes back round again, and when he opens his eyes, he sees the flash, an image flash in front of him of reptilian eyes with sort of vertical slits in, and he can see its forehead and the eyes up close. He's tried to draw it there, quite a detailed drawing there, and it was in his mind, and he felt certain that this was the same being coming back to him. He's showing him its true form now, and the being actually kind of sort of swooped towards him, and he kind of pushed out, retaliated, and immediately blacked out. It still wasn't the end of the experiences. Later in the night, he came round, found himself in his bed, and when he opened his eyes, he saw what appeared to be a reptilian arm up very close to him. It was almost like it was allowing him to observe it, or observe parts of it. Really strange, and you could see all the scales on there and these taloned fingers. And eventually he blacks out from that, and when he comes around, it's morning time. So he didn't have any direct abduction recollections, but that's not to say that one didn't take place. So we reach our conclusions. You've seen there a number of the different explanations, of possible explanations for screen memories. What do I think is going on with this? These are my conclusions that I've reached from all this. Oh, sorry, gone backwards. Let's try it again. So while screen memories don't always occur, there's certainly a very valid aspect of the contact phenomena. They occur in lots and lots of cases, many of which are directly investigated. There's a wide variety of overlays that can occur with these experiences, as you've seen, but there's also a noticeable repetition of themes across the cases. And I'm sure that as we've gone through all these cases tonight, you can see all those different similarities between the cases from completely different people with different backgrounds and different countries. What's my personal opinion on this? I think that in most cases, I think the screen memories are going to be something that's being done on purpose by the beings. I think that screen memories are occurring far too regularly for it just to be down to trauma or whatever else. I think it's being done for the same reason that the missing time is being done. I think it's being done to maintain this covert level and potentially reduce the trauma of the situation, which is why a lot of the time it's something familiar to the individual. That said, I think that in certain cases, there may be cases where trauma is the explanation for it, but, that the experience is so frightening to them that their brains put over an overlay, or at least a contribution to towards what they're remembering. So maybe multiple. So the existence of screen memories, it certainly complicates examination of the contact subject and the separation between what's real and what's just an imagined experience, like a normal dream. Because we're no longer talking about just cases where people see greys and are on a craft, like a futuristic location or clinical type environment that they don't, we're talking about cases where they could be in a hospital bed surrounded by humans, and they've still had contact even though they don't have any kind of direct contact recollections. Very interesting. But I think that through ongoing study of this phenomena, we can lift the mask to reveal the truth beyond. So that's my talk on the screen memory phenomena. There's the logo for my group, Birmingham UFO Group, and our main website, www.boofog.com. You can find on there very, very detailed case reports of all the cases I've gone over and many, many more. We've also got a Facebook group called Boofog Truth Seekers, which you're more than welcome to join. It's a community page. We have regular monthly meetings here in Birmingham, but between those meetings, we'll talk on there and post links to articles and very interesting stuff. And you're more than welcome to come in there, ask questions, post links to things, providing it's linked with the subject. It's all well and good. So that's some details there on my group. Now, I did say to finish off, there's something else I wanted to briefly touch on, and that is this. UFO Wave, the tactical card game of alien supremacy. So for a number of years, and Cheryl might have already informed you of this, but for a number of years, I've worked behind the scenes on a card game themed on the UFO subject. I've got a very big interest in both board and card games. I always loved that direct element of sitting around a table with family. I've got a 10-year-old daughter, so I wanted to make the game family friendly. So it's not only suitable for adults, but also older children would also understand how to play it. It's a tactical competitive card game for 1 to 6 players. So there is a solo mode in there. And the artwork has actually been done by a contactee, a gentleman from New York who's had actual contact experiences. I reached out to him to do the art for the game, and I was overjoyed when he agreed to do it. Obviously, it's been designed by myself, and with the art by him, it is the most authentic portrayal of the real UFO subject ever released in a game. But you can see from the art that we've taken it down a kind of fun, cartoonish route there. The website for the game, www.ufowavegame.com. On there, you can find all sorts of videos, aspects of the game, me going over in depth, playthroughs, the works. At the moment, it's being manufactured, and it's just about to be shipped out from China to people who initially backed the game on the crowdfunding website Kickstarter. We successfully funded back in August, and it's being shipped out to them before the end of the year. From early next year, I intend to be selling the game online. I don't know where it's going to end up. It may go on Amazon, it may go elsewhere, but you'll be able to find out all the details on that via the website. So you can subscribe to the website and then get blog updates on that if you're interested in purchasing the game. So do go check it out. I think you'll like what we've done with it. I've tried to keep it very closely linked with the subject. As you can see there, the different beings just in that initial image there. So that's a brief overview on UFO Wave, the tactical card game of alien supremacy. So that's the end of my talk. I hope you've enjoyed it very much and found it interesting. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Really appreciate that.